I think uh, relevance is really important. I don't think it's enough. Just tell certainly the younger generation, we were murdered, we were slaughtered, this happened. They have to understand, why does it matter? What are the lessons? What does it mean to me? It cannot be only, although Yad Vashem is a sacred place. It's not enough. You can't just expect people to come to the mountain. You've got to bring the content to the people, and you have to make it relevant.
Shalom Aleichem, and welcome to Stark Tank, the podcast about the challenges and opportunities of being a Ben Torah in the workforce. With Yom HaShoah coming up, this week I sat down with Lawrence Burian, the COO of LIV Golf, and the son of a Holocaust survivor named Andrew Burian. Before joining LIV Golf, Lawrence held a number of senior positions in Madison Square Garden Company, the company in charge of not only the MSG Arena, but also the Knicks, the Rangers, the MSG TV network, and lots more. We spoke about his career, his father's story, and how these two interact. We also spoke about Lawrence and his family's involvement in various Holocaust programs, about the keys to Holocaust education in 2025, and more. Before we jump in, a quick reminder that you can sign up for our newsletter at starktank.org, where we feature writing from working B'nai Torah from around the world. We have some great content coming up, so make sure to head over to starktank.org and sign up today. My name is Yaakov Wolf. This is Stark Tank. Lawrence Burian, welcome to Stark Tank, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
So we're going to start from today and then work our way backwards in time a little bit. So let's start with, what are you up to now? What's your role? What's your company like? And what are your responsibilities on a day-to-day basis?
So I am currently the chief operating officer at a company called the LIV Golf. It's been in the news quite a lot. It's a global golf league that has a number of businesses underneath it. It's really trying to transform the game of golf in a way that, for me, was very compelling as both a business and as a mission. We put on 14 really elevated events around the world that are both individual competitions, but more uniquely team competitions. We have 13 sports franchises that we've launched. We also have a 10 event feeder set of tournaments around the world affiliated with the Asian Tour. We produce our own broadcast and distribute it in 800 million homes around the world. It's pretty ambitious, and we're just in our third year. I've been with them just about a year and a half, and my role is I'm the chief operating officer.
And so that entails making sure that everything runs smoothly on all of the different fronts that you mentioned before.
Well, I've got different departments that report to me, and I've got real experts who work for me who really have the day-to-day expertise in their areas, and I'm setting together with my colleagues strategic direction, priorities, etc.
Got it. And this is not your first time being involved at a senior level in the sports industry. So maybe you can take us a step back to your role at MSG and what your job was there.
So I was an executive officer at the MSG family of companies for more than 12 years. I actually started at what was then the parent company of the Madison Square Garden set of companies, which was Cablevision Systems Corporation, and I worked on the spinoff of MSG as a separate public company, and then we wound up splitting the company multiple times, and then we merged back some of the businesses. At one point, I was an officer of three separate MSG public companies at the same time: MSG Sports, MSG Entertainment, and MSG Networks. I had started as general counsel, but over time, I took on other responsibilities, including I was head of business development, corporate affairs. I sat on the boards of many of our joint ventures and strategic investments. So I played a lot of different roles over the years. Madison Square Garden, of course, is not just the arena. It includes the New York Knicks and the NBA, the New York Rangers and the NHL, venues all around the country, including Radio City Music Hall and a theater, Beacon, the Beacon Theater in Manhattan. We had the Rockettes. We acquired the Forum in Los Angeles. We built the Sphere in Las Vegas. We had two television networks, a music festival, a film festival, a group of restaurants and nightclubs and hospitality properties, et cetera, et cetera.
So a lot going on, a lot of responsibilities, a lot of very impressive projects, which you're very much in the room at these very big decisions and big investments and big buildings are going up. And so all this really creates a very big contrast to the next sort of question I want to ask you, which is that if we roll the clock back, 90, 100 years from now, 80, 90, 100 years to your father's upbringing and his story, we have a very, very different picture and a very, very stark contrast. So maybe you can just give us a brief overview of your father's upbringing and his story with the Holocaust.
Sure. I'll try to be brief, and you can dig in as much as you would like. My father, Andrew Burian, Zichrono Livracha, was born December 12th, 1930, and he grew up in a small town in the Carpathian Mountains. It was then Czechoslovakia. It was a town called Bushtina. Today, it's part of the Ukraine. And he lived a wonderful childhood until the age of 13. Uh, Family roots went back to Bushtina over 300 years. Very connected to the Nedverna Rebbe, who ultimately settled in Bushtina and passed away in Bushtina. My father's family, both on his mother's side and his father's side, were actually quite successful financially in the sense that they had significant land holdings. They were in the lumber business and big forest areas in that region. So they weren't wealthy in the sort of the liquid way, but in terms of real estate assets. His father was clean shaven, so nusach sfard, but they were not themselves Hasidim. And everything really changed for him after the Munich conference when uh, a lot of Europe was carved up and the Hungarians came in. And that's when the troubles, as my father would say, began. Life started to change in the school, ultimately the Yellow Star, etc. He was taken from his home in 1943. He was 13, only a few months after his bar mitzvah. And I'll just give the broad strokes. Family was taken, by the way, from the railroad station that they had built for the town. They were deported to I mean, he called it ghetto, but it was really a brick factory, a holding pen until they can get trains to Auschwitz. This was in Hungary, but then ultimately they were taken to Auschwitz-Birkenau. Was my father was one of just 2 children. He had an older brother, his parents, and then, of course, tons of cousins and uncles and aunts. In Auschwitz-Birkenau, he was separated very quickly from his father and brother who shipped off to Dachau, and his mother, together with her brother and his grandfather, never made camp. They were murdered in the gas chambers on arrival. My father amazingly survived Auschwitz-Birkenau for 8 months as a 13-year-old. He endured many, many selections. He was selected for the death side multiple times. The one miracle after another in terms of how he managed to survive, not unlike many other survivors. Ultimately, he was part of the infamous death marches in the winter of, I don't have the date in front of me, I think it's 1944, to part of the evacuation of Auschwitz-Birkenau and loaded onto cattle cars and shipped all the way across Europe to Mauthausen in Austria, which was another infamous camp. He survived in Mauthausen and then ultimately endured another death march out of Mauthausen to try to escape the approaching Allied forces, and then was held in a place called Gunskirchen, which was really a Panzer base for, Panzer tanks. So the Germans, they were using the Jews as cover, and was ultimately liberated by American soldiers from Gunskirchen. Pretty miraculous story how he ultimately reunited. Both his father and his brother survived. I will note for any of your audience that is interested, my father wrote extraordinary memoir. It's published by Yad Vashem, and it's called A Boy from Bushtina. You can get it on Amazon.
Yeah, we can also include a link in the show notes so it's easy to access to the listeners.
Oh, that would be great. It's, all the proceeds 100% go to Yad Vashem. And what's amazing about the book, and there've been a number of people who have really written about how extraordinary the book is. Uh, Many survivors were old enough maybe to have memories, but then didn't have the English skills or the ability to write, or they were they have the English skills, but they were too young to have memories. My father's memories are crystal clear and detailed. He had an eye for detail, and the book is extremely powerful. So I'm obviously biased, but I recommend it.
Okay, yeah. And so maybe just tell us a little bit about, to bridge back to your story, and as we're going to talk a little more about the contrast about his resilience and recovery and how he started his life over again after this awful teenage experience trauma that he had.
Look, I mean, this is an amazing story that I don't think has been sufficiently told about how the survivors of the Shoah rebuilt their lives and the courage to do so. By the way, I was on the other side of the microphone. I did a series of podcasts, but they were video and of people who have had tremendous success in life post being survivors of the Holocaust. I did it on behalf of the American Society for Yad Vashem. So anybody who's interested, interviewed Diane von Furstenberg and the Wilf family and then president of Harvard University, who was the child of survivors, and uh, the founder of the Kind Bar Company, and others who,
Love those kind bars.
yeah. So the founder is a fellow whose parents were survivors of the Holocaust and deeply motivates what he does. So, uh, my dad, after the war, he quite a story in and of itself. He was turned over to the Russians and how he worked his way um, back towards home. And ultimately, the family, when they were reunited, were given a home in what was then the Sudetenland by the Czech government. They actually kicked out families who had voted for, I guess, the equivalent of Anschluss. But it was turning communist, and my grandfather, Obashalom, was concerned that my father was going to be drafted into the army. And my father got papers on his own at the age of 17. Took the Orient Express across Europe and wound up getting on a ship, the SS Washington, and arrived in New York at the age of 17. English skills whatsoever, less than $10 in his pocket, basically a refugee. And it's amazing to be able to rebuild a life and have a family. And my siblings are all both Shomer Shabbos and also have raised beautiful families with children and grandchildren, and it's amazing. But again, my father's one of, as you know, many, many, many people who moved forward.
It's really amazing. And how did this whole identity shift to you, and how does it driven you personally and professionally, being having this responsibility, this role, and this identity as being the son of someone who went through such amazing horrors but also expressed such amazing resilience and strength?
So, look, I don't think there's anybody who could be the child of a survivor and not be significantly impacted by it. I had an interesting duality in my home because my mother was born in Brooklyn and Flatbush and had a pretty wonderful and childhood and very, very different experience. So I had some balance. So I feel like I had both sides of the history, which I think was helpful. Rightly or wrongly, having the European background and the Holocaust background made me feel, as you said, an extra responsibility to both be uh, not to be another link in the chain of our Masorah that you know Hitler tried to destroy. So I feel a special obligation. I think it's, maybe unfairly, but I always feel like there's some, like my father had to have survived for some reason. So, there's a sort of special feeling. On the other hand, it's certainly the trauma has impacted me, and it's not all peaches and cream, right? There's real trauma that he sustained and impacted us in the home. I think that it's given me a certain perspective, I think, in terms of, again, for better and for worse.
Do you have any specific examples of, so I'm picturing you in these boardrooms in these very, very high powered situations, high stake situations, and any specific moments where you could point to and say that responsibility, that sense of identity, how it somehow influenced you or shifted your perspective or caused you to act in a certain way?
So I don't know how much of it is necessarily being the child of a survivor as much as it is being raised as, an Orthodox Dati person. I think that I do know that it has instilled in me the values of that there's more in my life than my career. I think that it's given me the ballast of whatever success I have or don't have professionally. You know, when you come to a keel, you come to shul, you just one, you just one of everybody else, right? That's not the be all and end all. I think that certainly as a general counsel, the ability, you need real backbone and you need to have real integrity to be able to speak truth to power and be able to have clear lines. And I think that the training of keeping Shabbos, keeping kosher, right? Those things and those obligations not sort of, give you a sense of, just like I would never allow a situation where I had to break Shabbos. Same thing where there's circumstances where you're just able to say no, and that gives you a certain power, right? You can't be owned by your job. You can't be owned by your boss. I've certainly had situations where I've had very high stakes situations where I had to get up and leave a conference room because of candlelighting or what have you. I feel like rather than hurting me in my career, I actually think it's made me more successful because if you do it with integrity and consistency, and you don't take advantage and you're willing to outwork others when it's not candlelighting, and I think it could be a source of respect. And so, again, whether it's being the child of a survivor or just being, Shomer Shabbos, I think it provides a sense of strength, inner strength, and ballast.
Right. I think, I guess, being the child of the survivor gives that Shomer Sabbath identity all that much more weight and responsibility. I mean, I'm gonna just ask one more time, and if you don't like the question, we can move on. But the candlelighting dilemma is one that almost everyone who's listening to this or has been a guest on this podcast has to contend with in some way, shape, or form. But you also hinted to speaking truth to power, having the backbone to sort of stand up. Is there any sort of examples on that in that vein that you could give to us and share with us with whatever details you're able to share?
Yeah, I don't want to share specific business discussions. I think that would not be appropriate, but I can tell you that um, I'm very clear with who I am and what I stand for. So, and I'm in rooms with powerful people in many different contexts, and go out to dinner, and I don't say I'm not hungry or I'm a vegetarian. I say I keep kosher. And I don't say, I have a personal appointment. I say I have to be out for the Sabbath. And I'm proud of who I am, and I think people respect me for it. I currently Live Golf is owned almost entirely by the Saudi Arabian Sovereign Wealth Fund, and I think that the notion of having a Shomer Shabbos person in a high position of a Saudi owned and controlled company is a unique opportunity to try to make a Kiddush Hashem. And, at the outset, very transparent about who I am and what I am. And to their credit, um, uh, they hired me. And I think that, again, I don't want to speak to specific examples, but more that what I'd rather say to your listeners is that consistency, integrity, and are two-way street. It means that in the summer, when candlelighting isn't until late, you're the last person to leave that office. It means that when it's Christmas or New Year's or Easter or what have you, you're the first person to volunteer to cover for somebody's work. It means that something that somebody else might take off for because they have a, a wedding or an event. Certainly in my earlier years, I got my time off, and there were sacrifices I had to make because I needed to not make my commitments other people's problems. And so I think that it's really, really important how you go about managing that and do everything you can to not look entitled or feel entitled, but understand that people are making an accommodation for you, and to not take advantage.
Amazing. So I want to go back to what we sort of alluded to before is this very stark contrast, this very rapid transition between your father as a subject of the awful death marches, showing up in New York with $10 in his pocket and nothing else to his name, contrasted to a high-powered executive. And when we think about that as sort of a model for the resilience, as you alluded to before, person could think of a lot of things. They could think of a Kadosh Baruch Hu's tremendous love for the Jewish people that were able to bounce back at such an amazing speed. A person could think about the personal strength and resilience of the survivors, which we also alluded to before. There are also, as you also mentioned, the trauma and challenges of these, stark contrasts between generations. So to you, what stands out the most within that dynamic?
Yeah. So first of all, um, it starts with just the parents and the lessons my parents taught me. My mother, she lived 120. She's still teaching me lessons, and the role modeling of them and my grandparents and everybody's come before me. I maybe I should think more about Hashem's role in all of this. And obviously, I don't take anything for granted, but at the same time, it's really hard to balance both the same Hashem who let the Holocaust occur and then the Hashem who supported the resilience. Again, I don't begin to try to understand it. So I don't really think that I'm thinking in that direction. I think that it's very interesting. And if you read my father's book, when he was being parting ways with his father and Auschwitz, his father gave him three instructions. And those three instructions reverberated for my dad throughout his experience. One was keep clean so you don't get sick. Number two was don't be a mensch. Don't let them make an animal out of you. And three was when this is over, we all return home. And first one obviously is very practical, but the next two were really the compass for my father in terms of what does it mean to be a mensch? What is the unbelievable challenges he faced to remain a mensch in that environment? What does it mean for us to be a mensch? The notion of home and returning and having a model that sustained him, a model of a Shabbos table, a model of a Yontif table. You read the book on a death march, he would imagine himself home at those tables. The kind of role modeling that we have by the generations and the way we engage with our and respect, as Orthodox people, as Jewish people, our elders, the people who've come before us. Uh, I think that gives us a image and a role model and what we want to get back to. And I think that my father was on a mission to, have that again in his life.
That's very beautiful. The reason why I think it's such an important question is for me, growing up in, suburban Boston, a very beautiful and comfortable and safe and secure existence. So we would have these Yom HaShoah ceremonies in school, and I was a good boy, and I tried to listen, and I tried to connect to the ideas and the values that were being expressed. But it was really, really distant for me. It was really, really hard for me. So we can get to October 7th in a second because that certainly has shifted a lot of things. But what would you say to that in terms of the memory of the Holocaust and how it plays into the very comfortable upbringing that I had, that your kids had in the American Jewish community?
Look, I always felt different from my friends who had two American parents. I always felt, my father was older, my father had a thick accent. So I think I've always grown up with Yom HaShoah being a sanctified day and recognizing, again, for better and for worse, the instability of the notion of B'chol Dor B'Dor, I think that I was quite acutely aware of that. So I think that I certainly grew up with a different consciousness than certainly what you're describing as your childhood in Boston.
So but now, when talking about it with your kids or other, you know, people who have not had that acute awareness, how do you talk to them about the awareness of the Holocaust, and how do you sort of penetrate, at least what was for me, some sort of level of like denial is a bit of a strong word, but it's like it just doesn't click when you haven't experienced the acute awareness that you have. It just like there's no tools to comprehend such a thing.
Yeah, so first, it's sort of start with how did my father communicate to us? And I will say he was wonderful with how he communicated about the Holocaust. When we were younger, and I can't talk for my siblings as much because, like many survivors, his ability to speak about it really shifted over time. And actually, done a fair amount of studying about why that is, and it's not just the Holocaust, it's why do, rape victims or other trauma victims stay silent for so long and then all of a sudden come out and speak, and there's a whole psychological understanding of the effects of trauma and at what point can somebody speak about it. But when I was a child, I remember Shabbos afternoons, my dad would go up for a nap after lunch, and I'd go up with him, and he would tell me stories of his childhood, and they were all the wonderful stories about pre war. And he really let me first feel secure and gave me appreciation of what was lost before we talked about the loss. And, as I got older, he shared more and I learned more. And I think that certainly that is an important dynamic with children and what's age appropriate and what's not. On the other hand, I don't believe in completely sheltering our children from the realities of the world. Unfortunately, after October 7th, I don't think there's anybody today who can feel completely sheltered from it. I don't think they should be. Again, age appropriate in the right context. So I have been personally deeply involved in Holocaust education for many, many years and really thinking about what are the lessons we're trying to learn and what are we trying to convey. I think that certainly the message of victimhood is not a great one. Certainly Israel in fact was uh I at its founding and after the Shoah was quite hostile to a lot of the Shoah refugees, and I think there was a philosophy of, we're a new Jew, we're Israel, you should have listened to us, you shouldn't have left, and maybe even shame. That all changed after the Eichmann trial as a watershed event, but I don't think the focus on victimhood is ideal. I think that there are, and again, as we move further from the event, the messages of resilience. That podcast I did was called Lessons from Our Parents. What are the lessons we learn? And so I do think that that's really important. I think that it's a little scary because as the survivor generation is just about gone and it recedes from history, educating about it is going to be more and more of a challenge.
Yeah, so can you talk a little bit more about your personal involvement that you just alluded to in Holocaust education? And maybe if you could just focus a little more, as you started to mention, on the values that drive you in that regard. And I'd also be interested to hear a little bit practically about memory, about documentation, and all the things that many people who are involved in Yad Vashem and other organizations have been doing. What are the lessons that they have learned over time in terms of how to effectively document and commemorate all of these events and stories?
So I've been involved in, as I said, Holocaust education for decades. So as early as 1995, I was approached to uh, co uh, launch the young leadership of the American Society for Yad Vashem. And I got very, very involved in programming for sort of the next generation, all sorts of events and programming to help educate about the Holocaust. I ultimately joined the board of the American Society for Yad Vashem, and for decades we raised tens of millions of dollars to support Yad Vashem. We had all sorts of programming initiatives and publications and activities, both to support the institution in Israel as well as to raise awareness and program in the United States. My wife, actually, who does not come from any survivors, she's born in the Midwest, wound up becoming the co-chair of the American Society as a complete volunteer position, but it was virtually full time. With a change in leadership at Yad Vashem a couple years ago, Yad Vashem has taken on a new approach towards how it wants to engage with representation around the world. And the American Society for Yad Vashem has mostly been shut down. We just administer funds that we have raised as an endowment to support Yad Vashem. So those activities in particular are no longer active as of about 2 years ago. My wife and her former co-chairman have launched a new organization called Asher that is much more focused on education in the United States, and is much more focused on combating anti-Semitism and transmitting the messages of the Holocaust, but less about a specific location or museum. And Asher is focused on partnering with best-in-class programming, so not trying to have that typical Jewish problem of too many institutions chasing the same thing. So they have a skeletal staff, and it's really having funds to partner with other organizations who are doing great work and be able to amplify their message. So it's additive, it's not competitive. So I worked extensively to help my father with his book, but there's so many projects that I'm proud of that um, I've been a part of over decades in terms of educating about the Holocaust. And you asked me what are sort of some of the lessons. I think uh, relevance is really important. I don't think it's enough as I said before, to just tell certainly the younger generation, we were murdered, we were slaughtered, this happened. They have to understand, why does it matter? What are the lessons? What does it mean to me? It cannot be only, although Yad Vashem is a sacred place and is just built an incredible new document repository that's deep underground, so that it will be protected for generations to come. It's not enough, you can't just expect people to come to the mountain. You've got to bring the content to the people, and you have to make it relevant, and there has to be a takeaway. And I think there are many, many messages and takeaways.
And you alluded to anti-Semitism and the combat and the fight, which unfortunately is all too relevant nowadays. For me personally, whenever I think about the vastness of the horrors of the Holocaust, and along with the depth and long history of anti-Semitism, both of those topics make my head just spin, and I feel like I have nothing to think about, nothing to grab onto, and nothing to really do about, with massive topics. So, what's your approach in actually trying to be active in those spaces?
Look, I think there's, what can you do on a personal level? What can you do on a communal level? What can you do on a societal level? I think that when you're in Israel, actually, it's harder, frankly, I think, to have an impact, because in the diaspora, you're engaging with people. Every engagement is an educational opportunity. And there's also so many Jews in America who are really affiliated in any way, shape, or form. It is not a good thing, by the way, that for many, many Jews, certainly in America, that a primary identity of being Jewish is victimhood and the Holocaust. I think that that is not a long-term sustainable way to keep people passionate and care about their Judaism. So I think that's a mistake. I think that, um, what can you do to scale? I think something like podcasts are scalable as opposed to just speaking at one organization. It's contributing funds to support programs and activities that are scalable. I think it's engaging in advocacy. And again, I'm no hero, but I try to do my part through all sorts of organizations and work. I have a friend who has an incredible initiative called Pens for Swords, where she has harnessed thousands of people through WhatsApp to do letter writing campaigns and other things to combat anti-Semitism. It's incredible what her name's Faggy Fader, what one person can do to make a difference. And it's being vigilant about understanding that history does repeat itself, and understanding, the realities, and not putting our head in the sand about those realities.
Yeah, and that's a great segue. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your experience post October 7th, and being the son of a survivor and being an activist in the space of anti-Semitism and Shoah memory. To what extent has October 7th changed the way you approach things or how you think about these issues?
Look, first of all, needless to say, October 7th was just an unbelievably tragic event in Jewish history, and I think we're all traumatized by it. I think that October 8th was also very traumatizing in terms of response, society's response, and particularly what we're seeing in the United States has been deeply troubling. I think that, unfortunately, as a Holocaust survivor's son, I think I'm less shocked by it. I think I'm more attuned to it. I think I'm more prepared for it. I think for many, many people in the United States, I have Jewish colleagues who went to law school with me who really certainly were not, maybe they were reform or unaffiliated, who were leaders in progressive movements that feel so betrayed and feel so, uh, again, I hate to keep using the word, but traumatized. On a personal level, my wife and I went and purchased an apartment in Israel after October
The
7th.
greatest revenge.
Right? We think, I'd always talked about it, but I just felt like I wanted to be more connected. And frankly, I know this is like almost like a crazy thing to say, but I feel like I need a place to go to. Um, I don't, no matter how successful we are as a community in the United States, um, I know the history. I had something that had a huge impact on me when I was a child. I had a history teacher in eighth grade. This is Edelman, who was German, and her father was a World War I general in the German army. he had won the Iron Cross, which is essentially like the Congressional Medal of Freedom, or the purple, not the Purple Heart. That's just being injured. The highest military honor you can receive. And when the you know soldiers came to his apartment to take him, he's like, "Young man, do you know who you're speaking to? I'm a general." And they took the Iron Cross and they threw it on the floor and they took. I don't have, again, it's crazy to say, but I don't have any illusions. I think that America is, I do believe in the American dream. I am forever grateful for what America has enabled. I'm very proud to be American. I think that Jewish life in America is worth fighting for. But at the same time, I'm also vigilant, and it's scary. It's really scary.
I appreciate the realism, and on Yom HaShoah, we can't forget, and not forgetting means to actually not forget. So I appreciate you putting the cards on the table and saying it like it is. And before we get to our rapid fire, I want to ask you a little bit about parenting. Every parent has, I think, an instinct to try to provide a comfortable and happy and protected and safe life for their child. On the other hand, taking that too far and over coddling and overprotecting and not allowing the kid to get up and fail and have to get up or have to fend for themselves from time to time is a general dilemma that's being talked about a lot in the parenting literature nowadays. And I'm wondering, for you, having this sort of link to, coming from nothing to a very, comfortable and successful life in America, within that context, how you sort of approach that as a parent.
Sure, I just want to correct one thing. I don't feel like we came from nothing. I think it's a big part of, as I said, that returning home. I think that, and even if you are poor, you still feel like a king on Shabbos and Yontif. And I think that that's really the Seder. And I think that's really important. My mother came from a very comfortable, and I would argue, wealthy family. Measure it, but successful family, I should say. We didn't live in any kind of extravagant life, but I never felt like I was wanting. And my father never felt like he came from nothing. He felt like he was taken from him and he was returning to something. And I don't
That's
mean
very interesting.
wealth. I feel like that doesn't mean that he didn't have the qualities of a survivor and feeling, couldn't throw things out and couldn't waste but I'm saying ultimately he had a vision of where he uh, wanted to get back to. Look, I think that we all we all struggle as parents in terms of balancing those issues. As I said, with my children, the Holocaust was very much part of their childhood. They had a mother who was, you know, spending her days working for a Holocaust institution, and a father who was speaking and engaging and running programs, and so it's been part of their lives. And I'm very proud to say that my children are continuing that. Sons have organized programming on their college campus. They have uh, been leaders in all sorts of things. My son Ethan joined an organization called 3GNY, which is third generation that speaks in public schools about it in a way that's for non-Jewish audiences. My son Adam just volunteered. He's going to be on the March of the Living equivalent for Yeshivat Har Etzion. He volunteered to speak, and my daughter, who's only a sophomore in high school, has volunteered on these topics. So in general, I I think we're all more engaged in our children's lives than our parents were in ours. Society has certainly changed. I do believe in letting the kids take risks. I don't think we're overprotective parents. I think we're over involved in sort of schoolwork and the like, and they're over programmed. But I think that in terms of letting them go off on their own and have new experiences, embrace challenges, we try to foster independent thinking. I will say, talking about this is a little bit off topic, but maybe it's relevant. In all those years that I was working at Madison Square Garden, I went to countless sporting events and entertainment events. I've always been uncomfortable at concerts, even though I enjoy them. Some people love that losing yourself in the collective, and I always felt afraid of like the power of somebody on stage and 25,000, 20,000 people all being like, and so I think that I'm much, much more inclined to be willing to both for myself and to raise my kids to not necessarily go with the majority. And in fact, I think that could hurt me or them socially. But I think that when there's groupthink or everyone pursuing something, I think I'm much, much more likely, as are my kids, to go the other way.
I think that's a very profound message. Okay, let's go to our lightning round. 3 short questions, 3 hopefully short answers. As we transition to the summer and we have long Shabbos afternoons, what does Lawrence Burian like to do with his long Shabbos afternoons?
I definitely like to sleep. I'm definitely somebody who takes long naps on Shabbos. I do a lot of reading on Shabbos. I'm in the middle of Daf Yomi, so we have I have a friend who gives a Daf Yomi Chabura on Shabbos afternoon, so usually go to that. Take a walk with my wife, visit friends. Probably nothing, nothing different than probably what most of us do.
Okay, great. You mentioned your father's book. Is there another Holocaust book that you find particularly meaningful or inspirational or that you'd recommend to others?
I would recommend A Man's Search for Meaning. I think that's Viktor Frankl, right? I think so. I think that it's an incredibly powerful book. There's a disciple of Viktor Frankl who I met. She's not a young woman who wrote a book called The Choice. Her name is
Edith Eger.
Edith Eger.
Edith Eger.
I must tell you, and it's all about how do you respond to adversity? How do you respond? And that you have a choice, and only you can control how something affects you emotionally. I struggle with that, so I think it's good muster for me. I must tell you, just as a side note, I have met countless famous movie stars, athletes, performers, politicians, and with only two exceptions in my life, they've all been just, they're people. They're all people. I mean, of course, my two exceptions are also people, but there are two people in this world who, when I met, I had electricity run through me, and one was Edith Eger. I met her and I melted, and there was something extraordinary about her, which made me want to read her book, of course, and the like. The other
And
person
who was the other one?
was Bill Clinton, but again, whatever you think politically, I'm not making a political statement. There was something just electric when I shook his hand. Felt me.
Well, and our final question, if you had to choose a new job, any job in the world, maybe something you had an itch to do as a kid in a new industry or in a new field, what would that be?
There were times I think I would really enjoy teaching Gemara. I think I would really enjoy it. I've always had fantasies growing up of being the president of the United States. There are parts of it as I got older that I would enjoy, but I think I've always had that fantasy. It's never gone away. Ambassador to Israel would be up there. CEO of a company that I feel passionate about the product would be another.
Okay, Lawrence Burian, thank you so much for coming on for our special Yom HaShoah episode. We really appreciate all of your thoughtful ideas and all of your memories and all of your stories on this very important day.
And Yaakov, thank you so much. And thank you for what you're doing. I think that you're doing your part in trying to use a platform that you've built to educate. I'll conclude with where I started. It's really an honor to have been invited, and I appreciate the conversation and call Kavod for everything that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much.